Hello, welcome to The Conversation on News Central Television. This is a program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I'm Rita Omodia. Lots of political stories around the African continent. And just last week, we talked about Zimbabwe and the electioneering period. And so far, we've heard news that about 25 opposition members have been arrested in Zimbabwe as against the 2023 elections. Also in Nigeria, some hours ago, the candidate of the Labour Party, Peter Obi, was at the Chatham House reeling out his plans for the 2023 elections. As we well know, the elections in Nigeria is less than 40 days away.
Yeah, interesting times on the African political scene. Now, in the North African country of Tunisia, protesters last weekend trooped out in their numbers to demand the resignation of President Kais Saied over the country's worsening economic situation. The protesters, who made the demands on the 12th year anniversary of the Arab Spring Revolution that toppled former President Zini Al-Abidim, says something must be done about the current economic crisis and political restrictions in the country.
Meanwhile, on our other topic, after the Tanzanian government's decision to lift the 6-year ban on political rallies in the country, opposition leader and former presidential candidate Tundu Lissu has expressed his intentions to return to his home country from exile. Lissu left Tanzania 6 years ago after being shot 16 times by unknown assailants. Now he says he will be returning and may be contesting for the country's presidency in 2025. I must say lots of things going on there for Tundu Lissu. I mean, a man shot 16 times. It still amazes me how he got out alive.
And I remember I spoke to him last year and I said, you know, the man that you referred to as your tormentor-in-chief is no longer with us. Are you willing to let bygones be bygones? And he said no, that those who carried out this assassination attempt are still in government, so justice needs to be served. And 26 surgeries later, I mean, it's gone through a lot of personal trauma. It's very important that he seeks justice. But we'll look at the story in Tanzania and see how things go. But let's start with our first topic of the day. On Saturday, Tunisians took to the streets to mark the 12th anniversary of the overthrow of dictator Zini Al-Abidim Ben Ali and to call for the resignation of President Kais Saied. Protests took place in several areas, including the central Habib Bourguiba Avenue and the Ministry of Interior in the capital, Tunis. Despite police barricades, the protesters managed to push through to the avenue. The protests come amid a major economic crisis in the country with high inflation, shortages of fuel and basic staples, and rising unemployment.
Now, President Saied has faced growing anger since he dismissed the government and suspended parliament in July 2021, citing a threat to the country. He has also been criticized for dissolving parliament in March 2020 and drafting a new constitution that gives the presidency more powers while weakening parliament. Tunisia's transition to democracy had been seen as successful, but a failure to improve living conditions for the majority of Tunisians has led to growing disenchantment with the political class. And now joining us to discuss all of this as they celebrated 12 years in the Arab Spring, we have Mohammed-Dia Hammani, a researcher, Syracuse University's Maxwell School, United States of America. He joins us from New York. We also have Elizia Volkmann, a journalist who is joining us from Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conversation. All right, so if you're with us, I'll be going to Elizia, and we want to have a deeper understanding of the recent protests happening in Tunisia and what exactly are the core demands of the protesters, because we saw lots of videos on social media with a lot of people saying that the president should step down. So what exactly are their core demands?
So the core demands, as you said, is that Kais Saied steps down. I mean, nobody wants a further degradation of the state. And there are different political movements and factions who were marching on Saturday. Unfortunately, they're not remotely united. So you had one coalition that's called the National Salvation Front that's been campaigning and marching against Kais Saied's, what they call his coup d'etat, since sort of September in 2021. And we've seen the centre leftists come forward And there were also dialogue between the labour union and other members of civil society. But we can in no way say that this is cohesive. But certainly these protests coexisted, and there was also apparently a plan to protest outside the presidential palace, but with the roadblocks and also stopping the trains that stop outside the presidential palace, that didn't happen. There's also, I've been told, a lot of sort of trying to cool the situation. What nobody wants is a violent kind of another sort of violent sort of revolution, and there's a fear that if people get fed up enough that it could go that way. So I've been told that there's been a sort of a conscious effort actually on both sides, both the president and on the demonstrator side, to actually try and keep the situation cool and calm. And if they are successful in meeting their demands, I would expect that Tunisians have worked very hard to work for peaceful transitions. It's very much the Tunisian way to try and work things out by negotiation. But unfortunately, there's been a serious deadlock, and Kais Saied is not somebody that anyone can really talk to and have a dialogue with. So we can expect probably more pushing and more demands for him to step down and go.
Thank you, Elizia. I'd like to bring in Mohammed-Dia from Syracuse in New York. Let's track back a bit to July of 2021. What was the driving force behind President Kais Saied's decision to dismiss the government and suspend parliament in July of last year? And how has this decision been received by the Tunisian public?
Well, President Kais Saied had a different vision of how the political system should look like since 2011, in fact. But when he ran for election in 2019, he was not that open about it. And in 2021, he exploited a general crisis that was exacerbated by the spike of COVID deaths and shortage of oxygen supply, followed by a scattered protest in different parts of the country to justify his move and deploy the military to prevent members of the parliament from having access to it. And later on, he suspended the constitution and adopted a new one in what is commonly described as a self coup or a presidential coup.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to bring Elizia into all this, and we're still going in the part of tracking records. Now, if you go back to the beginning of the Arab Spring uprisings about 12 years ago, which the anniversary was celebrated on Saturday. Now, what started it was the suicide of a produce seller, and we talked about the economy of Tunisia then, which led about global awareness among the northeastern states and, of course, the Arab Spring. Now, if you look at Tunisia's economy now and then, do you see this as a major push factor for the protests that we have seen so far? And how is what Kais Saied has done, the suspension of the parliament, the constitution, also increase the protests we have today?
So if we track back actually to 2009, 2010, the origins of the first revolution in 2011 were economic. There are political economists who say that actually Tunisia was on the brink of being a failed state. Maybe that's overstating the case, but certainly the country was being completely gouged out by corruption. And as the process of the revolution and the national dialogue and the political transformation moved forward, what got left behind was the economy. And there's also been one of the sort of upshots of this political instability over the past sort of 10, 12 years is that Tunisia hasn't really formed sustainable development plans and hasn't really sort of looked at sort of long-term, sort of 5-10-year development plans with an economic bent. There have been some changes, but they really haven't been substantial enough. Add to which that we've had serious sort of economic fluctuations over the past 12 years. We've had COVID, there's the war in Ukraine. The external pressures on Tunisia are massive. The inflation is imported inflation. We're seeing shipping crises, the massive problems in terms of access to food and grain because of the Ukraine-Russia war. So this is a lot to bear for a small state that is politically and economically unstable and fragile. So what's happening inside the country is serious food shortages. And we've seen in the last week the sort of Tunisian staples like spaghetti and couscous are now disappearing from the shelves. And this has probably been the worst year for food shortages. And it's put massive strains on everybody, and it's sort of across the social classes, obviously hitting the poorest hardest. We're seeing that the purchase power, the dinar has been weakening, and wages are stagnating, there's unemployment. So people are really struggling to make ends meet. And what we saw actually the day before the protest was a video when Kais Saied was doing one of his walkabouts on Habib Bourguiba, because he's been sort of trying another sort of publicity sort of push the last week, to try and raise his image, which is pretty bad. It's probably the lowest it's ever been. And there was somebody on the street who was saying, I'm hungry, we're hungry, try and sort this out. What are you going to do? And we saw inside, normally he has this sort of, I suppose, sort of quite sort of smooth exterior when he's doing these walkabouts, and he really kind of lost his rag and he started shouting at this poor man. And I think, if there are more incidents like this, it could do him a lot more harm, and also make people completely lose faith in him as somebody who's cared, because he rose to the presidency on the back of being an ordinary man, saying, I'm somebody like you, that he was campaigning against the corruption, and that he did spell out his plan, but in a very sort of oblique way when he was campaigning. And it wasn't a sort of this kind of council multiple tier system of what he calls direct democracy. Wasn't well explained to the populace. The vote for him was an anti-corruption vote. And because he was an outsider and he was somebody different, he taught a lot of lawyers, a lot of students. So a lot of people had a sort of personal loyalty to him and really gave him a chance. And even after the coup, people said, okay, we'll give this guy a chance. But 18 months have passed, and all they're seeing is that Kais Saied is focusing on his political sort of restructuring of the country. We've just had elections. We're heading towards the second round of legislative elections under the new constitution. And that he's mostly concentrating on attacking people that he says are the enemies of Tunisia and not resolving deep economic problems.
Okay.
The review for the IMF is not until March, so there's no sign of anything on the horizon, as being a rescue plan, which people really need. So things are getting quite desperate, and there's going to be a tipping point when people's exhaustion is outweighed by their anger. And
their patience would also run out if something is not done. Now, Mohammed-Dia, Elizia did mention that President Kais, a PR stunt, taking a walk on Avenue Habib Bourguiba. How did that go? And again, what are the reasons beyond the economy that people are really angry with President Saied's leadership? It's been met with growing anger among Tunisians. And do you think Tunisians have been impatient? Because a lot of the reasons why the economy is this way is because of external factors, the Russia-Ukraine war, and also COVID-19. Can these still be used as an excuse, or do you think he could have done something better? He could have better managed the economy. What's your take on this?
So yes, there are multiple reasons why Tunisians took the street on Saturday, on the anniversary of the 12th anniversary of the revolution. As you mentioned, the economic factors were very important, but we can't blame the war in Ukraine for everything. In fact, we saw shortages of certain goods that don't have anything to do with Ukraine, like things like coffee or domestically produced milk. These things are not available anymore in Tunisia. Same thing for sugar. And Tunisians are not really used to such large-scale food shortages. What makes Tunisians even more concerned is that President Kais Saied see all these economic problems as the result of conspiracies from his opponents instead of dealing with them as serious economic issues. And as a result, he alienated political actors from the right to the left, in the sense that we've seen people from the old regime, kind of authoritarian, with authoritarian tendencies protesting against him, the Islamists on the right, going through the center Democrats tend to be more in the middle of the political spectrum. But again, as I said, it's not only about the economy, it's also about the former political system he unilaterally designed and forces adoption since the last summer, with a referendum where only around 30% of the population showed up. And now, even when people are refusing to go to vote in the legislative election, around 90% of the population did not show up, only around 10% did participate in the December 17th election. So despite all of that, he's still going forward with the implementation of his political system centered around the presidency. So for all these reasons, Tunisians are fed up with the situation, and they are not willing to wait further, simply because it doesn't seem that he is able to properly assess the seriousness of both the economic and the political crisis and address it as he should do.
Okay, Mohammed-Dia, I would like to stay with you because you've emphasized two major reasons. I mean, economy, and the reason why people are angry is the fact that he's more criminalizing his opponents than dealing with the main issues in Tunisia. Now, I would like you to give us an overview of the protests on Saturday. I mean, we've heard about human rights violations in the past in Tunisia. How were the police able to handle the protests? Were there any arrests? Because we saw lots of people come out for the protests. And how were they able to maintain peace and order for the protests?
So in terms of human rights violation, this year's protest, meaning the anniversary, because usually we celebrate the anniversary of the revolution almost every year. So it has been better organized than last year's one, where one protester died. However, we saw repression and arrests in other parts of the country where people, especially young people, took the streets to protests in the same way they've been doing during the last years. So it was not visible in the center of the capital, but Tunisian media have been reporting about police abuses throughout the last several months. One of the main reasons that may explain why we did not see outrageous abuse of human rights on Saturday's protest is simply because one of the main human rights organizations, the Tunisian League of Human Rights, deployed observers. Plus, I think there was a lot of attention to what the police was doing, including attention from countries that supply Tunisia with security equipment and assistance and aid. I think for all these reasons, the police was not willing to engage in oppressive violence in the way it usually does.
Thank you, Mohammed-Dia. Elizia, you were on the streets of Tunis on Saturday. Tunisia has been referred to as the birthplace of the Arab Spring, the Jasmine Revolution. Now, can you explain the significance of the 12th anniversary of the toppling of dictator Zini Al-Abidim Ben Ali, and how was it commemorated on Saturday by the protesters? What message did the protesters hope to send with the actions?
Well, this was significant because the president had changed the date of the official date of the anniversary of the revolution to December 17th. And so this is something outside of the presidential's, I suppose, his sort of the circumscribed calendar that he's now created. So just marching on January the 14th is an act of defiance now, whereas before this was, the date of the anniversary of the revolution, because it was the date that Zini Al-Abidim stepped down and the journey towards parliamentary democracy began. So as Mohammed said, there was a heavy police presence. But what I've seen over the past 18 months is generally the police is very calm and professional in the capital of Tunis. I think they're very aware that the international press and local press cameras are on them. And as Mohammed-Dia said, there are observers, not just from the League of Human Rights, but there's a lot of the heads of major human rights organizations were marching and were present there. So it's in their interest to give a good impression. But behind closed doors, once the cameras are turned off, it's a very different question, as we've seen in Gasserine. I mean, this is always a very hot period in terms of protests and marching. And what you saw in Gasserine was actually something that happens a lot of the time in poorer neighborhoods and the popular and the informal neighborhoods, are these clashes between youth and police. And this is actually one of the other reasons that people have been protesting and why people are angry. Is one of the things that hasn't really changed and has got worse is police impunity and the violence. And this is another reason why the Jasmine Revolution happened, is that people were just sick to death of this police control. And that it improved for a while, but it has steadily worsened. And the sort of pressure on top of it is too much.
Now, Elizia,
in terms of a message, I think what people fundamentally just want to live, a good life. They want to eat well. They want to, freedom of movement. They want to go around a job. Just get married, have a good life, and they feel that they have no way forward. So their message is, there are a lot of people who want him to step aside, or if he's not going to step aside, do something, change things, get the economy back on track. But more and more people, really doubt him. Even his supporters say, we think he's a good man and clean man, but he just doesn't know what he's doing. And that's the fear, and that's the problem.
Elizia, I'm going to pick up from that. Now, you're saying that people are saying Despot is a good man. Is the action, or rather his approach, is termed as wrong. What options does Kais Saied have at the moment? I mean, we've seen protests not only from the public on Saturday. We saw judiciary protests and the lawyers' last week protests against the high tax going on in Tunisia. What options does President Kais Saied have at the moment?
He's basically, as you say, he's kind of put up or shut up. Either he brings together a team of people who are competent in economy and can make radical reform, but also people who are good economic diplomats. This has been one of the big problems with Saied. He just doesn't really know how to talk to people or talk on the international stage. At the moment, the Prime Minister, Najla Boudan, and the Finance Minister and the head of the Central Bank are at Davos. But in that, you also see that they're part of the problem. There are a lot of problems in terms of the controls of money and how the dinar operates by the central bank. So it's a very, we're talking about having to undo a lot of things that are very deeply entrenched in Tunisia. So he needs to put forward a serious plan. He needs not to be accelerating and elevating taxes, but actually having a concise plan of how he's going to bring in money. And I say at the moment, the only serious option is the IMF loan that seems to be available. If he gets the IMF loan signed off, that will signal to other states that Tunisia is worth investing in. So that's one side. Or he has to swallow his pride and step them down peacefully and allow some kind of transitional process to take place. I mean, Tunisia has managed this before with the national dialogue. It is wholly conceivable that this is possible again. But whether he will do that, I personally very much doubt. I fear that it is going to be a situation where things will go until they actually break. How that will look, I'm not sure. But that he's a very proud man and he doesn't listen to people. And that's, at the moment, that's also a major problem.
Now, Mohammed-Dia, Elizia did talk about the character of President Kais Saied. He's not very diplomatic. You would think someone from his background as a constitutional lawyer would be more accommodating of dissenting opinions, and he's done things. He's solidified, he's constitutionalized and consolidated some of this decision. So do you expect him to reverse the constitution? And also looking at the just concluded parliamentary elections, he doesn't trust the political parties. There was a system that even the electorates did not understand, and it contributed to the large number of voter apathy. So my question to you, Mohammed-Dia, is this: can political protest and concerted trade union action stop President Kaid's march to autocracy? Because he chips into the blocks of democracy little by little, test the waters until, we had a referendum and he suspended parliament and nothing happened. So what will stop President Kais Saied's march towards autocracy?
I think it's a great question. I don't think that Saied is willing to stop his march toward what I would call more the implementation of his political project. I don't think he will be able to actually transform Tunisia into a fully fledged autocracy like it used to be under Ben Ali 12 years ago. In fact, he even referred once to martyrdom as his only way to resist to the pressure that may come from outside. And he believes a lot of conspiracy theories. He does not believe that the opposition has genuine reason to oppose his move. He thinks that he is not a dictator, that he will never be a dictator. He said it once. He said that he was paraphrasing Charles de Gaulle, and he said, at this age, I'm not ready to be a dictator, but de facto is consolidating power and becoming like a president with no basically limits and balance of checks. However, there is one solution. I don't think protests will be able to move him away or force him to
what about strong and influential trade unions like the UGTT? It's quite powerful in Tunisia. They should be able to do something.
The UGTT is not willing to push Saied to resign. However, this solution might be a consultation between different actors of the opposition. UGTT may play a role in mobilization, but the idea would be to find a common candidate in the next presidential election in 2024, coordinate action, mobilize votes instead of having many candidates and splitting the votes and winning against him through the ballots. That's the only way to peacefully replace Saied with someone else. And I don't think Tunisians are willing to accept anything than a peaceful transition.
Okay, Elizia, I'd like your own view on this now, talking about the opposition. I mean, how strong are they? Talking about the Ennahda party, which Kais Saied is saying that is rooting out due to corruption. How strong is the opposition in Tunisia to actually root out President Kais Saied?
And are they united? Do they speak with one voice? Do you see that happening anytime soon?
I mean, this has been one of the problems, since the coup, is that the divisions between the different political actors are very deep. We've seen a substantial weakening of Ennahda. They are not the political force that they used to be. And I agree with Mohammed-Dia that UGTT is probably the most powerful actor in this. There have been calls from smaller parties like the Republican Party for people, the different groups like the National Salvation Front and the centre-left to actually come together and to be more united. I think there's a long way to go before people will actually put aside their political differences and to unite in a constructive and coherent way. So I do think there is a way to go yet, and a lot of dialogue between the different movements. I think there's also still although there's a desire for an end of the situation, I think there's also a lack of a clear vision of what a transition would look like. And there needs to be that conversation, because if you don't know what you're aiming at, then things could sort of turn into a sort of disorderly mess. But it is, as Mohammed said, it is the way of Tunisians to negotiate and to have dialogue and to have a peaceful way out of a crisis rather than to take arms. That just isn't the Tunisian style. And I think that will be the process. But again, it's this weakness. It's a case of the opposition can only stand in strength against Saied if they are united. But how to actually physically oust him is another question. I mean, who would physically do the removal? Which force or agency would actually get Saied to leave the presidential palace? Because I don't believe that he would bow out gracefully. His talk of sort of martyrdom, it's one thing to say that you'd be a martyr, it's another thing to actually physically fall on your sword, or to go out and will yourself to be shot or commit suicide. These are very dramatic things and they're big words. So my question is, which I don't think any of us can really sort of imagine now, is physically how this will come to an end, what mechanisms, what agencies, what people will actually get Saied to leave the Palace of
Elizia, what about international community? I mean, you talked about the Monetary Fund, IMF's assistance to Tunisia. Tunisia is in deep economic crisis. So don't you think international pressure will also help in putting an end to this authoritarianism of Kais Saied?
And also donor countries that help fund Tunisia's government.
Oh, this is already happening. I think it's believed, though we don't have confirmation, that part of the reason that the IMF have put off the discussions about Tunisia's loan is because they want to see an actual parliament installed and instated, back in the Palace of Bardo. We'll have the next round of elections, but with only a 10% not even turning up to vote for the first round, we don't really expect much from the second round. And there are a lot of appeals rejected by the administrative court. A lot of the candidates didn't pass. So we don't expect much from the legislative elections. And certainly the international community are very loath to give Tunisia any more money. There's certainly they will give it to help people stave off starvation. We've already seen that with donations from the European Union, who bought grain for Tunisia back last Ramadan. Nobody wants to see Tunisians be hurt more than they're hurting now, but certainly there seems to be a policy of sort of doing nothing and effectively sort of starving him out of office. But it's also very problematic, because the longer that goes on, then the worse the situation for the economy will be. And we're also seeing the raise in interest rates, and the central bank talking about liberating the dinar so that it can be traded on forex. But unfortunately, when a country's in crisis and you free a closed currency, then the value of the currency falls, and this could have a very, very maybe not disastrous, but a profound effect, not just on ordinary citizens, but on business as well, because Tunisia is a net importer.
Thank you, Elizia. I think the cat there was trying to tell us that your time is up.
I do apologise. I've been lost
So thank you very much, Elizia Volkmann, for joining us from Tunis, this great conversation. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Mohammed-Dia Hammani, a researcher at Syracuse University's Maxwell School, who joined us from Syracuse in New York. Thank you both for your contribution and your time to the program. We do appreciate it.